Welcome to the Association of Cannabinoid Specialists First Ask Us Anything event. We do want to acknowledge the tragic collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge this morning. We want to extend our sympathies to everyone who's been impacted, and we will be continuing to think of you. This event is in conjunction with the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy's Graduate Studies in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics program. Today we'll be focused on questions that have been submitted by students as well as our member base, and the questions will focus on the medical cannabis space. Before we get started, I just want to take a moment to tell you more about ACS and our free student member program. ACS is an international association of healthcare professionals at the forefront of cannabinoid medicine. Founded by physicians, ACS is uniquely positioned to advocate for the highest standards in the practice of cannabis medicine and safeguard patient care. We are an advocacy organization striving to provide guidance to lawmakers and regulators at every level of cannabis control. For all of ACS's constituents, we provide evidence and experience-based education to support the premise that cannabis should be treated as medicine. We offer free membership to full-time students and discounted membership to recent graduates. If you are interested in membership, please email info@cannaspecialists.org to find out more. Benefits include access to educational materials and journals, advocacy on behalf of our members, networking opportunities, and more. And with that all said, here's a little about the MCST program. The Graduate Studies in Medical Cannabis Science and Therapeutics program provides students with the knowledge that they need to support patients and the medical cannabis industry, add to existing research, and develop well-informed medical cannabis policy. It is the first program in the United States dedicated to the study of medical cannabis at the graduate level. I, along with Sarah Narum, who is here on this call with us, are proud alumni of the program with the class of 2023, and we are absolutely delighted to continue building the relationship between ACS and MCST. And now, for a little background on today's panelists, Dr. Jordan Tishler is a cannabinoid specialist and founder and president of ACS. Dr. Tishler graduated from both Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, trained in internal medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, and is faculty of both the Mass General Brigham and Harvard Medical School. Having treated countless patients harmed by alcohol and drugs in his time as an emergency physician, his observation that he had never seen cannabis overdose led Dr. Tishler to delve deeply into the science of cannabinoid safety and treatment. James Winokur is the founder of High Power Consulting. He focuses on startups and small businesses, especially companies in the cannabis industry. James was most recently CEO of Berkshire Roots, a Massachusetts-based cannabis cultivation, production, and dispensary operator with locations in Pittsfield and Boston. James earned an undergraduate BA degree in political science in 1986 from Boston College, and in 2002 earned his MBA from the Boston College Carroll Graduate School of Management, with a concentration in marketing and operations. James is a board member of ACS as well as the VP of Finance. Dr. Adam Abodeely is a board double certified surgeon specializing in gastrointestinal diseases and cancer, and is founder and CEO of Adirondack Gastrointestinal and Colorectal Surgery, LLC. He is also the CEO and co-founder of Coral Cove Wellness Resort, a cannabis-centric health and wellness resort in Jamaica. In 2024, Dr. Abodeely was appointed to the New York State Medical Cannabis Advisory Council. Dr. Abodeely has been treating patients utilizing cannabis-based therapies since 2010, and Dr. Abodeely is also a board member of ACS. Carrie Armour has over 15 years of experience representing physicians, patients, and the cannabis industry as a government affairs attorney and advocacy consultant. As a consultant, Carrie focuses on improving pain management and influencing policies to create highly regulated, compliance-focused cannabis programs, as well as expanding opportunities for cannabis research. Prior to opening her consulting firm, Armour Advocacy, Carrie worked for over a decade for the American Medical Association in its State Government Affairs Division. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree from Miami University and a JD from Loyola University School of Law. Carrie is also on the ACS Advisory Board. So without any further ado, we can get going with the questions. I do have some that have been submitted, but if anyone has any that they are just dying to ask, feel welcome to put it in the chat and we can get those towards the front. So let's see. Who wants the first question? Okay, I actually love this first question. It's not so much a question as a statement. It says, I am nervous. There is not a place for me in the cannabis industry. So this is open to any of our panelists. If you'd like to respond to that thought that there's just not a place, feel free to take it away from me.
I can start because this is a great one. There's always a place. Like, I've never been in an industry that is more accepting of people coming in from different industries, different ages, people that have been retired that come back in. I mean, it's essentially a startup industry, and each state has to start up their programs. If it's medical or if it's adult use, there's still two different programs in the state. So there is plenty of opportunity, no matter what you want to do. It is a very welcoming industry. I mean, it is exhausting, but I want to dispel anyone's belief that there is not a role for someone. If you have the wherewithal, the tenacity to get out there and network and join amazing organizations like ACS and, come to events like this, I mean, you're in the right spot. So I cannot say more about how fun it's been to be in this industry for the 8 years that I've been here, but there's certainly plenty of roles.
And I would just flip the question around or the statement around and say, what do you want to do? Right? Sometimes that's the hardest question to answer. I have this discussion with my wife all the time. What do you want to do? Once you know that, and this is a great place to sort of hone those ideas, then you'll be able to go after it. And as Carrie said, you'll find it.
I just want to broaden what Carrie said. I've been in the industry about 10 years now, and I've been fortunate to experience probably pretty much the spectrum of the cannabis industry, from the nonprofit that we're talking about that's medical focused. I started in a hardware company as a startup. I went to a multi-state operator that was about product manufacturing, branding, licensing. I went to a vertically integrated company that covers everything cannabis, including retail and wholesale. And I'm now actually just starting a life sciences based company. So whether it's science or marketing or education or lobbying for changes, it really runs a gamut. So the interesting question would be, what was that person's background? Do they feel like they want to evolve to something else? That change can be difficult, but I've hired a ton of people across all those things, and they come from very varied backgrounds.
See, that's great news. And as a recent graduate, very good news for me. I appreciate that. So let's see. The next question, also open to everyone. How can graduates best work with and support physicians in the medical cannabis space?
Well, I'm going to go on and say it depends on what you want to do. There's a lot to be done. It seems to be a theme here. In thinking about the relationship with physicians, that could be advocacy, like working with us here. It certainly could be working in a physician's office, depending upon, again, what you want to do and what your background is. And then there's sort of on the dispensary side of things, which is, as I think we'll probably talk about a lot this evening, a sort of complicated and fraught relationship at the moment. For people who are here and graduate of the UMaryland program or other programs where you're learning the level of detail and professionalism, you have a lot to offer in terms of bringing dispensaries sort of more in line with what physicians need from them for their patients. Adam, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you said, Jordan. And going back to the previous discussion and question as well, I think it kind of relates to that as well. I'm a physician, a surgeon, and that's where I developed my initial interest in the cannabis industry, was through my patients and through the medical applications of it. And I've continued to work with a variety of different. It's been a great industry because, as Dr. Tishler said, it's a new market, and with a lot of respects. And with any new industry, there's all aspects of that industry, whether it's dealing directly with the product, whether it's marketing, whether it's finance, whether it's, relationships. There are a tremendous amount of opportunities. And for me personally, although my initial interests and from cannabis came from the medical aspect of it, I've also gained a tremendous appreciation for cannabis as a wellness application. We talk about the medical industry, we talk about the recreational industry, and I think that they are two very distinct industries. But however, there can be some overlap from time to time. And one thing over my course of taking care of people and patients is the same people who have who have an interest in using cannabis as either a therapeutic application or a wellness application, not just from a strictly from a recreational standpoint, but these are largely the same type of people who were involved in other holistic wellness, or forms of holistic wellness, mindfulness, meditation, these types of things. And I do feel that cannabis is going to, plays a role in that aspect and industry as well. So I frequently talk about this. I talk about the fact that we as cannabis community talk about the two distinct markets of recreational and medicinal. I also tend to throw in a third market in there, which is that kind of wellness market as well, where people use it to kind of enhance their overall wellness. So there are a tremendous amount of opportunities, and cannabis is going to continue to inject itself into a variety of different industries. I was recently asked to speak to a chain of hotels that are interested in incorporating cannabis through their spas and things. So what that points to is that cannabis is gaining popularity. It's gaining acceptance, but I do think that there's a big difference between using cannabis as a medicine, using it as a recreational tool, if you will, and then using it as a wellness tool. And so it really opens up the opportunities for people who are interested in being involved in the cannabis industry, because there are just so many different aspects of it.
So our next question is, what is the future likelihood of having cannabis specialty clinics in large medical healthcare systems?
I think the answer is very shortly. What that actually means in months or years, I couldn't tell you. But I think that, we've been hanging from the thread, right, for months now that the cannabis would be rescheduled. And I think there's a good chance that it will be, right? I mean, in some ways, the question is, what is the DEA doing right now? And, to my simplistic thinking, they've had the recommendation from the scientists and the physicians since whatever it was, September last. So I can't, and the question before them is yes or no, right? So I'm not sure what they're doing, and I think that there may be some political grandstanding going on behind the scenes. But I'm hopeful that we'll get a yes decision somewhere towards the election, which is sort of my political conspiracy thinking. I mean, the conspiracy could be flipped around and said, well, maybe they're just holding out and hope that Trump wins and then they don't have to do anything. I don't know. That being said, I think that once it's off Schedule 1, then we can start talking to large medical institutions about acknowledging and bringing this on board. And at least in the Northeast where I am, I think that there is on the provider side, a pretty good acceptance of this as a medicine at this point. Doesn't mean anybody really knows what they're doing or even what they're talking about, but they've gone from, no, it's the devil's lettuce to, okay, this has reasonable therapeutic value under the right circumstances. And so I think that, there will be, of course, a period of uphill sell to the administration of any of these institutions. But once it's not patently illegal, and undoubtedly when we start to think about insurance coverage, then they will start to see dollar signs and want to implement these things. Now you've had my full conspiracy thinking as well as my financial cynicism.
It is funny how money gets everything moving, right? There was a message in the chat while you were talking, so similar along the lines of what you were just saying, but what are the best ways to advance these clinics and like really push it forward to make it happen?
Well, if I could add on to what onto that and add on to what Dr. Tishler was saying too, one of the challenges we face is just the federal legality of it. And if you look at physicians across the board in the United States, approximately 80 to 85% of them are employed by a larger healthcare system, and the larger healthcare systems receive federal funding, and that federal funding is used to employ the physicians. So as a result, physicians have been largely in larger institutions have been largely devoid of being able to use cannabis. I've been in private practice, which was the reason I actually kind of got nudged into doing it initially, because I was one of the only doctors who was in private practice in the area that had any interest in doing it. And I actually reached out to several oncologists, neurologists, pain specialists to see if they would be willing to do it. And a couple of them were willing to do it. However, once they met with their their HR reps and things and tried to see if it's something they could initiate with the hospital, it got completely shut down. So I think it's going to be a challenge until we hit some federal leeway here on having larger institutions be involved in medical cannabis.
Yeah, and I would just say what Jordan had touched upon as the rescheduling issue. Once it is removed from 1, likely down to 3, there is going to be much more institutional comfort with cannabis and considering it. And then especially what, Adam just mentioned about getting federal funding for their institutions. I think once it is off 1, there will be way more comfort. I still think there's going to be issues with formulations and how patients are going to use their cannabis, because it's a long way before there's going to be an FDA approved cannabis product. And in my mind, I think that's probably decades away. I mean, Jordan, I love your feedback. I know we kind of talked about that before, but I think any type of actual cannabis product, FDA approved, is longer than when it's going to be for hospitals and institutions to allow cannabis on their premises.
You will not get an argument from me on that at all. I think, as soon as pharma gets involved, we're still talking 10 to 15 years before they get everything in line, unless, of course, they have something brewing in their back pocket that we don't know about, but probably not. So, yeah, I agree. It's going to be a while before we move from the medical to the pharmaceutical model.
Great. There's another question that was sent into the chat. It's asking an opinion from each of you on just who should be able to educate medical patients about the medical aspect. Should a patient be needing to meet with someone who's licensed or something of that nature?
Yeah, well, I'm going to take probably an unpopular position, which is that the patient should be meeting with a physician. And that is not to say that there aren't other professionals who can be brought into the process, but like in the conventional world, it should start with a physician, and the physician should be ultimately responsible for the clarity and correctness of the information that is imparted by any other professionals who work for that person. So, we certainly have models, for example, in diabetic care, where there are pharmacists who regulate the insulin, and there are education nurses or other professionals who do a lot of the counseling, and certainly we have folks from the nutrition service. But ultimately, these people work as a team, and at central of that is the physician who's ultimately responsible for that patient's care.
Anyone else wants to address it, or are we all of the same opinion?
Well, I would say there's states though that do, expand the healthcare provider from beyond a physician to a pharmacist, nurse practitioners. So the states have already moved. Like policy is beyond a physician being the sole healthcare provider that can, provide that care. So I think it is going to be difficult to walk that back in the many states that do allow, again, pharmacists to be in dispensaries, as well as getting even recommendations from nurse practitioners. There's some states that just self-attest that a patient is eligible for medical cannabis. So I do think that it would take a lot of work to walk back those policies.
I'll just chime in. Adam, Dr. Abodeely mentioned a trifurcation of the industry with recreational wellness and medical. At ACS, we are advocating to change this on the medical side to a prescription, a legitimate, not recommendation, but actual prescription. And the importance of that is if you're really trying to solve a medical issue, you should be talking to someone who understands your particular needs, requirements, other medicines you're on, other ailments and conditions that you may have. I know that, I have that experience myself where I'm trying to solve something and someone knows as a physician holistically what's going on with me is a lot better situation to solve that issue. I do also think that even though Carrie's right, it's hard to walk this stuff back. I think there's a bigger opportunity for the industry on the medical side. And I talk about this within our organization all the time. There are many more people who go to pharmacies to get their pharmaceutical prescription or over-the-counter medicines than there are that go into dispensaries today. But if it were a true prescription and we were really working with doctors, I think the industry would benefit by having more people come into a dispensary with a prescription.
Yeah, and let me clarify, just to Carrie's point, nurse practitioner at the center, fine, as long as they're educated about what they're doing in the cannabinoid space. The issue for me is that I think that many folks are not properly educated, and there's far too much sort of repetition of the stoner lore and canon instead of actually sticking to the medicine of it. And I absolutely, to James's point, that there's no question that there's a much larger market in the medical market if we can actually start to address not just the cannabis using or cannabis curious crowd, but really the much, much larger people who've never really given one iota of thought to cannabis, unless, of course, their doctor says, Mrs. Smith, maybe we should try you on some cannabis something for your back pain. And, most patients don't come in with a pharmaceutical plan in mind. They come to the doctor for help with the problem. And ultimately, we're going to need to address that much larger group. And the only way we can do that is through addressing their healthcare providers. But one of the major issues for healthcare providers in the system at the moment is that they can tell the patient what products to look for and how to use it and how much to take and all of those good things that's what healthcare providers are there to do. And then the patient gets down to the dispensary and the product isn't there. Or there's somebody behind the counter who tells them, and this is a quote that was fed back to me from a patient. He said, guy said, I don't know what your doctor's talking about. Forget what he said. I'll tell you what to do, which unfortunately was quite wrong. In the pharmacy world, in CVS, if you go to your doctor and they give you a prescription for your blood pressure medicine, they are very specific about it, and it goes into a computer and pops up at your local pharmacy, right? Where, yes, there's a pharmacist and they're there to answer questions, but they're not changing things. They're not making it up. They're not saying, hey, would you like a side of Percocet with your blood pressure medicine? And those are the kinds of things that still go on at the dispensary level that ultimately derail patients and often cost the patients a whole lot of money in the process. And now I'm going to shut up for a moment or two because you can see it gets me a little wound up.
I'll take that as a moment to transition to the next question. This one is specifically for Carrie and James. So Dr. Tishler, you can take a nice sip of your drink. Carrie and James, what are the key regulatory challenges that students should be aware of when considering a career in cannabis dispensary management?
Cannabis dispensary management, interesting. What's great about the industry is every state has come up with its regulations, so you can read them and know what you need to do. I think in whatever state you're in, we just need more people advocating and lobbying for the changes that would make A, it better for the industry, and B, we just talked about better for patients and consumers. You know, the challenge is you are living in these very tight regulations. And when people talk about other regulated industries like alcohol, I always say, you have no idea. Try operating in this industry for a bit. Your employees are under camera, you're under camera, everything needs to be logged. You can't miss anything because the state will come, you know, audit you. So if you're a very organized person and you are efficient, you'll do really well in this industry, because it just requires attention to detail like nothing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I would completely agree with James, and I would also add like the regulations are insane, and they are all different in every state, and they constantly are changing. But most of them do require a criminal background check. I mean, they are very particular on the medical side. That's what we're talking about here. But really know your regulations down to the local level. Because not only do you have state regulations, but you also have the local regulations that are going to require your complete attention to. So
yeah, I just thought of one thing, Carrie, that's probably universal across every state. In the dispensary, you are not allowed to associate your products with specific medical solutions. So it's very important that you understand the state regulation, but it's probably true wherever you go. That means you have to ask a lot of questions of the consumer, and I would suggest the dispensary person should be directing them back to the medical professional. So what we don't want, you know, as ACS is for someone to walk in and say, I'm having this ailment or condition, what do I need? With that person behind the counter not having any background to do that. We'd love to train people to ask the right questions. And they don't have to be pharmacists or doctors. Now, in some states, there is a pharmacist on site, which is great. So that can solve a lot of that issue. But from a regulatory standpoint, usually it's product marketers cannot talk about solutions to conditions, and people in the store cannot either.
And
Thank you.
let me just add, James, that the reason they can't talk about those products and conditions is federal law, right? So that's an FDA and FTC matter. So the point is, Carrie was talking about state and local, but there are a whole bunch of federal laws that, even though it's cannabis and it's illegal, they still apply.
All right, we have another question that is specifically for Dr. Abodeely. And this person is curious if, when you started incorporating cannabis into your practice, if you faced any difficulties, repercussions, anything you want to speak on in that area.
Yeah, for a while, I wasn't taken seriously as a doctor anymore, to be quite honest. It was quite a challenge. This is going back to 2010, 2011. I found myself in an interesting position back in 2010 because I was faced with a relatively large cancer population who was advocating for their own cannabis use, while at the same time I had our medical oncologists who were opposed to it for reasons that we talk about: drug-to-drug interactions, cannabis potential interactions with chemotherapy agents, and things of such. And I was initially brought in to be the broker, if you will, and I had to pick a side. And so rather than rather than taking the high ground, I decided to listen to my patients. And it was a lot easier to listen to patients initially who were using cannabis, seeking cannabis for what I perceived to be purely for palliative reasons. People who had a few months left of life to live. I said, who am I to judge if they're using cannabis? But I began to educate myself on cannabis and began to realize that there were a lot more reasons that several of these patients might want to consider using cannabis than not use cannabis. All the reasons that we're all on this conversation today, we believe in the benefits of cannabis in one way, shape, or form. It was quite a stir because in 2000 I began really just guiding people, since it was not medically legal until 2014 in New York State. So for several years, I was just counseling patients based upon my own, educational understanding of cannabis. But when it became legal for medical purposes, I tried to convince, as I mentioned, several other of my colleagues to be able to start using it, or to start certifying patients for it in New York State. And none of them either could do it, or they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to take the risk doing it. And then I developed a medical cannabis clinic outside, separate to my surgical practice. And I actually had doctors who were telling me, and they actually did, they stopped sending me referrals for my surgical patients because I was incorporating cannabis into it. And fortunately, I felt it was the right thing to do, to continue to provide that information, that level of guidance, and provide cannabis for patients. And I took the educational ground. I got out to grand rounds through our hospital. I met with all the surrounding hospice organizations, and I was always met with very mixed reception. Some were very open, and then the other ones, sometimes I would have oncologists or hospice providers who were simply, they wanted to do nothing but to try to criticize me and lambaste me as I was giving a presentation about the potential benefits for their cancer patients. It has really come full circle, and I think that is through people like myself, people like everybody on this call, of us just continuing to educate, spread the word, but that's also why too that it's important that we take a responsible approach to this. And as long as you do that, which we've always done through our medical practice, that it's hard to at this stage, I think most of us would agree, and most of my colleagues are completely accepting. And I've had several of my colleagues who have subsequently started sending me their patients again. I've had people apologize to me, because at the end of the day, cannabis has really been led through advocacy at the ground level, through patients and consumers. And what started happening was that then these patients decided, well, you know what? I'm going to continue to see you as my surgeon, but I'm going to get a different primary care doc, one that believes that medical cannabis might not be a bad option for me. So eventually everything came circle, and the majority of providers nowadays are completely accepting, at least locally and regionally. I think nationally we're getting closer, but we're not quite there yet. But to answer the question, yes, absolutely. And it took me a very long time and a lot of soul searching, because at the end of the day, my income and my sole job is being a surgeon. So it's very hard for me to make sure I didn't sacrifice that for the sake of providing cannabis care to patients, but I was able to find a nice balance.
Awesome. Well, always glad to have some progress, even though it takes a considerable amount of time. This next question was sent in via email and is now being boosted up in the chat. So this question is focused on ACS's stance on cannabis use and pregnancy, acknowledging that there are concerns, but there's also been use by different cultures even before prohibition in the US. So I'll pass that on to you, to anyone in this panel.
Jordan, you might be best to want to start this one off.
Yeah, I'm hitching up my big boy pants here to answer this one. If we are looking at the scientific evidence, there are about a dozen studies since the mid-1980s, which started with Melanie Dreher's study, that have looked at the effects of cannabinoids on human infants through the teenage years. And the only robust finding has been low birth weight, but none of the other markers of potential harm. That said, when we look in the teen years, we do tend to find that children who are exposed in utero have an increase in emotional difficulties and lower intellectual achievement. Of course, it's absolutely reasonable to point out that there's a whole lot of stuff that goes on between being exposed to cannabis in utero and being a teenager, including environment and exposure to other substances and potentially exposure to learning opportunities. So when we look at the totality of that evidence, it's really unclear what to do. About half of the studies show that there's no significant problem, and the other half show significant problems. So, you know, as Dr. Abodeely has said earlier, the medical establishment tends to try to take a fairly reserved and responsible position on these things, and the absence of evidence with such a high stake phenomenon as pregnancy, several organizations, ACS included, and the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology have taken the position that this is something that's probably best avoided until we know more. There was embedded in the question there a certain interest in sort of comparative cultures, and I think that it's interesting to look at the cannabis use throughout the ages and across cultures, but here in the United States in 2024, we can use those things as inspiration, particularly inspiration to do scientific research, but I don't think it substitutes for scientific research. And so we still need to move the ball down the field using, you know, good scientific method. And I hope that answered the question.
And the only thing that I would add to that is that I personally have never treated any refractory cases of pregnancy-induced nausea. However, certainly it certainly could be reasonable to assume that if somebody had such a bad refractory case that they run a risk of a miscarriage or some other potential that, you know, could cannabis potentially be an option? Yes, it certainly could be, and certainly considered to be maybe a form of risk mitigation in some respects. But again, to George's point, I think very limited cases it might be acceptable for.
You know what? I don't think I would disagree with that, but I do think that the problem is at some point, you know, your concept, which is, you know, maybe in the direst of circumstances, then we would do this thing that otherwise we're not sure of, somehow kind of has this trickle down at the dispensary level as, sure, you know, if you have a little morning sickness, come on in and we'll give you a joint. And somehow these things are not equivalent, and we need to kind of figure out how we're addressing those things.
Oh, just another area that we need more and more research in. Absolutely. This next question is for the entire panel. It's kind of a general question. Are there remote work opportunities in the cannabis industry?
I would say yes. I can give you a couple of examples at least. You know, I helped develop a medical telemedicine clinic here in the U.S., which had several layers to it when it came to, you know, potential job opportunities. Everything from, you know, nursing to administrative positions to marketing positions, all of which have all been done remotely.
Yeah, I would add that generally there are software platforms in all kinds of areas of cannabis, whether it's at the dispensary level or research, or as Dr. Abodeely was pointing out, it's a little tougher in cannabis because it is a manufacturing retail operation in the legalized areas by state, but I think those remote opportunities are probably more around technology or research.
And I would just agree with what James just said. And they're looking beyond working in a dispensary or a, you know, laboratory. There's plenty of research opportunities working for your regulators, your advocacy work. So there's plenty of other opportunities that are not necessarily within the dispensary that could use your help.
Great. Thank you. Carrie, I'm going to keep you talking. This question is for you specifically. It says, Carrie, you have spent time as an advocate and company advisor. How have you reconciled conflict of interest between best practices and your clients' plans?
Oh, okay. This pains me all the time because I have clients that are not even in the cannabis industry. And as James and Jordan know, I try and keep a low profile, and, as a consultant, I give them advice and I give them a map on how to play, and then it's up to them. But I have a pain board that I work with, and they hate cannabis. They want nothing to do with it. So it's very challenging, but it's just kind of like, as any kind of client, you kind of treat your clients individually. But it is it's certainly difficult, but on the ethics side, I mean, always like, these are the rules, these are the regs, these are what your medical board says you can do. And then, give them all that information. But it is definitely challenging.
I'm not jealous of that job. Let's see, this one's for James. How did becoming involved in ACS change your approach to corporate management in the cannabis space?
That's a good question. I don't know what my approach would have been without ACS. I can tell you very clearly, again, as a medical patient, being very interested in the medical side, I was very confident talking to my staff, let's say at the company that was vertically integrated, about how important it was to produce really great products, to be very transparent about what we were producing and the testing results, and to follow all those regulations I mentioned in store with how we dealt with customers / patients, and making sure we connected them to physicians and medical people that could really help them with the ailment and condition. So it did shape our approach in marketing and in-store activity for sure.
I'm going to send it back to Carrie. Carrie, how can non-lawyers affect policy decisions?
They can't, could I look like I was off my microphone?
Great.
You don't need a legal degree to be able to read a piece of legislation and to be able to be a good communicator. So there's plenty of advocacy organizations that you might want to start volunteering for. You don't need a law degree to do this. It certainly helps, especially when you're advising, operators. But if you are interested in advocacy, as Adam mentioned, the medical cannabis industry was really created by patients moving this forward. And it was very grassroots driven. And it wasn't, again, you do not need a legal degree. I can't stress that enough. But you do need to know how to speak about medical cannabis. And I'm just going to give a plug again to ACS and for their amazing educational courses they have, is you need to be able to how to speak about medical cannabis in a way that you can be trusted. You can, though, also kind of speak in a way that you can make a legislator understand. I mean, I think we've probably had a lot of, we all see what's going on in Congress, and too many of these legislators think that they, know how to practice medicine. I don't know if anyone caught the Supreme Court oral argument today, but you need to be able to read research and be able to distill it down so that you can, articulately, press your case forward. So, yeah, it's what I like. My daughter's thinking about going to law school right now, and I'm like, no, don't go. Save your money. So you don't need it.
Great. Let's see. That's some good questions here, honestly. There was another question about law school specifically for Carrie as well, but you basically covered it there. let's see. One person asks for Dr. Abodeely, how did you get interested in cannabis?
Well, as Carrie had mentioned, this all came from, I feel very strongly that the movement through cannabis has come at the grassroots level and from patients. And I learned from my patients again. I went through the traditional medical teaching throughout college, throughout medical school, throughout residency, throughout fellowship. We had to get drug tested all the time, and one of the things that they were testing for was cannabis. And at the same time, parallel to that, we were being taught about the negative effects of cannabis and other drugs as we're being taught through this. So it was something that I was quite surprised to come to find out that so many people, you know, where my practice is in Lake Placid, New York, which is in northern New York, and at the time just happened to be a very quite large cannabis culture in the community. And so it was through my patients that I developed an interest, because I wanted to be honest with them. You know, as you know, what I found early on is that the people who were talking to me about cannabis were not the people that I thought that they were going to be, as they were always portrayed as being, you know, the typical, you know, pothead, unmotivated, lazy, overweight, uneducated individual. I started realizing that a large percentage of the people who were using cannabis in what I define as a responsible way to treat symptoms or to treat a disease or help them, you know, with whatever condition they were treating, these were salt of the earth people. These were attorneys, doctors, health professionals across all aspects, and so it certainly taught me that the conventional thinking and the conventional teaching that I was subject to over the previous years was incorrect in so many ways. And so it really was my patients who helped me, you know, gain an interest in it. And once I saw the, you know, the benefit, you know, we've all had revelational moments maybe throughout our life where things tend to click. And the perfect example I can give you for this was a patient who was dying of end stage cancer, who was on multiple opioids, and I would see the patient in the hospital daily. And this was a patient who was on such high level narcotics that the patient was almost, you know, they were completely what we call narcotized. They were almost in a coma-like state. No meaningful interactions with their family, friends, loved ones over the last few days of their life. And somebody decided one day to sneak them in some cannabis. And I came in one day and at the end of my workday, and they were all sitting around enjoying a meal, laughing, having a good time. And so for the first time, I got to witness what cannabis could do, at least relative to something like opioids. And so for me, it was a very eye-opening experience to say, if I haven't had problems slinging opioids to these people who are dying of cancer, I certainly shouldn't have any problems with offering them some cannabis. And then hence began my journey from there.
Yeah, that's really powerful. We kind of touched on bud tenders and how they can be a little different than doctors and how they speak about cannabis. So this person's asking if you can share any insights or experiences on how bud tenders and other dispensary staff can effectively communicate with patients about medical cannabis.
I'll be happy to take that one, because I can give you another example of a case I had early on with the New York State Medical Cannabis Program. And this is where it comes down to what is the difference? What really is medical cannabis? And I've had lots of interactions with the bud tenders, and in New York State, oftentimes are largely pharmacists who, I'll tell you, are much more intelligent than I am when it comes to biochemistry, physiology, pharmacology. But I had a patient with severe inflammatory bowel disease who came to see me for medical cannabis, and I had made a recommendation of an inhalational form of medical cannabis, and the patient brought those recommendations to the dispensary, and I saw the patient back a few weeks later, and things weren't working. And so I asked what the patient was consuming, and I found out that the patient was consuming a bunch of oral formulated cannabis. And I said, "Oh, well, why are you using this?" Said, "Well, you know, the the pharmacist at the dispensary, although you recommended an inhalational form, recommended these. And, and again, not that the pharmacist may not have been wrong about using that particular formulation for other people, but in this case, the difference between doctoring and being at that kind of, at the bud tender level, if you will, is little did this pharmacist, who again is extremely intelligent individual and very knowledgeable about physiology, medical cannabis, didn't understand that this patient had short gut syndrome, had severe inflammation of their guts, which did not allow them to absorb any of these. This patient was on 4 or 5 different antidiarrheals just to allow them to have 20 bowel movements a day. So, you take a patient like that, and walking in the door, you look at them, and, if the pharmacist or the dispenser or the bud tender says, well, maybe you should try this product instead of that product. Well, this was a case where it failed. And the second I said, I want you to go back and I want you to insist on getting an inhalational form, and the inhalational form worked. It was tremendous. And so there's the difference between, treating cannabis as a medicine and understanding the patient and the interactions, the complexities that may exist with that individual, other medications they may be on, versus somebody who may have a tremendous amount of experience, but doesn't understand maybe some of the medical nuances which could exist.
So that refers back to statements I was making earlier. At Berkshire Roots, when I arrived there, I wanted to make sure we were well educated amongst our dispensary employees. There are courses to help our dispensary employees, and ACS, in fact, has a bud tender course. And it's not about becoming a doctor. It's about how to interact with patients, the way Adam was just describing. And I think for everyone who's gone through your program or is about to graduate or has graduated, wherever you are in the industry, advocating for that is really important. It's not that difficult for a bud tender, a dispensary agent, to learn the right questions to ask. And that's really all we're advocating for, not for them to become physicians or pharmacists, but to ask the right questions.
Yeah, and that's absolutely right. And I actually had called this pharmacist back, who I to this day have a great relationship with. And I said, listen, we're in this together. If you think I've recommended something wrong, if I prescribe a medication for Crohn's disease, or if I prescribe an antibiotic, I will frequently get a call from the pharmacist and say, hey, you know what? I looked at some of the drug-to-drug interactions, or in this case, because of the patient's age or comorbidities, I might want to change the dose or something. I've opened up that line of communication between, the pharmacist, who, serves as the kind of the role of the bud tender, at least with our regional dispensaries, in a way that is seeming that they're involved, which I think is a good approach too.
And I would just add, it really does depend on your state that you're in. There's certain states that are very prescriptive of what the dispensary operator, how they train the dispensary agents, and what they can talk about and what they can't talk about. And that training oftentimes, let's take Ohio, for example. Any kind of training needs to be created by a healthcare provider. It has to then be submitted to the Board of Pharmacy. The Board of Pharmacy reviews it and then okays it. So then that is a way that they ensure that the operator isn't, encouraging their dispensary agents to, again, like change a formulation, change the type of product. So there are states that do it a lot better than other states. So I would say, whatever state you're living in, again, it's super important to read the rules and read the medical board rules as well, if there are any, on how what type of communications can be made in the dispensary.
Great. Thank you all so much for those answers. This next question, this person is curious if and how cannabis is used in rehabs and nursing homes across the U.S. as either an adjunct or alternative therapy.
It's not happening yet, really, very much, but it will. And in fact, this was something that Luba was starting to talk about much earlier in our conversation. Clearly, there's a huge growth need in that age group and that sort of disability group. But at the moment, the issues for those kinds of facilities are the same as for the acute care hospitals, which is the federal illegality stands in the way of their reimbursement and their licensing and that sort of thing. So again, we expect this to change hopefully, this year, at which point there'll be a lot to grapple with and a lot of job opportunities.
Great. This next question, this person says, we've heard about how important it is for education around cannabis use to be disseminated. What is your opinion of the best way to get educational information out, through recreational audiences or strictly through medical side?
Seems like those two audiences need different kinds of education, right? I mean, so I think it's all important, and sort of the question of how is the best way to get that out there. I don't think I have a good answer for that. I think we are as a not-for-profit educational group doing a lot of things like this, or coursework, or newsletters. I mean, we're trying the various social media networks as a way of trying to put in front of various groups of people, mostly professionals, but also to some degree lay people, try to put the information out there. And it's tough because there's a lot of money on the other side of the equation pushing things kind of in the other direction. So certainly we're open to any and all ideas that people may have as they're listening to this evening.
I mean, I would also advocate to look at articles that are in mainstream media. Most of them have a clickbait headline because they want to get attention. And because they're online, you can comment and you can ask the author for backup. Like, okay, you wrote this anecdotal information. Is there research? And by the way, there's lots of research. So if you're writing a piece about cannabis, why aren't you going to find the research instead of just anecdotal? So I think we can all press the press. We can all ask the press to do a better job to dig in and not take, just anecdotal, salacious stories and put them out in the news.
Right, it's a great idea.
And if you are looking to get out, spread the news, I had a lot of success early on. Again, I was doing this largely just for myself initially, but I was giving talks at everything from local and regional libraries, which had opportunities for speakers, and local health food stores that had like weekly, health topics. Any sort of regional organization, like hospice organizations, are a great one to there. And people will show up. It's the type of thing that everybody's interested in hearing about cannabis frequently, especially if you're in an area that's kind of a newer market. People are interested. So there are a lot of opportunities locally and regionally. I spoke at, Kiwanis clubs and, Rotary clubs and all sorts of things that I got invited to speak to. And I did, and there was a huge audience. So if anybody wanted to, start to educate at a local or regional level, those are some great areas to start with.
Awesome. Thank you. So on to our next question. This is my cat. If you can see her down here, says Tabitha. But ACS is an organization that promotes the education and advocacy of medical cannabis. This person's asking, what advocacy initiatives or organizations do you support to advance patient access and research in the cannabis industry?
Yeah, there's not a whole heck of a lot of them right now. Americans for Safe Access, is an organization, but most of them are kind of local and regional, if you will. And I don't know, Jordan, do you have any other? I mean, I always support the International Cannabinoid Research Society and their efforts.
That's really scientific more than policy advancement. But yeah, you're right. There are limited choices. Like there are a few, like Council for Cannabis Regulation is pushing some sort of science agenda. There was a group in Connecticut called MACRA that Carrie and I participated in, but seems to have largely dissolved. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of room for advocacy in trying to push science and policy here.
Okay. Our next question is asking, what are some ways that medical cannabis can be incorporated with physical therapy?
Well, that's a good question. I guess it depends what would be the purpose of incorporating it for physical therapy. It's from a medical standpoint, if somebody was having a severe pain syndrome or a neuropathy of some sorts that was preventing them from getting appropriate physical therapy, then that might be, an indication for cannabis. Outside of the medical reasons for physical therapy, I with using cannabis, I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
I don't think we have literature at this point around using cannabis specifically for physical therapy. We certainly have a small literature around using cannabis in the setting of a workout, more generally speaking, athletic workout, both in terms of use sort of prior or during the workout as a way to increase endurance and that sort of thing, and then use of it after the workout for treatment of pain and muscle soreness and that sort of thing. How that translates into the more medically oriented and more specific goal-oriented physical therapy, I don't think we have that information yet.
We did touch a little earlier on rescheduling and what's going on with the federal government and all that good stuff. This person's asking, how do you anticipate that rescheduling will affect medical cannabis patients?
Carrie?
Well, rescheduling isn't, all of the medical programs right now are through the states. Okay, so rescheduling from 1 to 3, I don't think is going to affect state medical cannabis programs at all. I think it's like, as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be decades before there'll be any FDA approved medical cannabis drug. What kills me a little bit is that there's been so much discussion about making just an adult use program federally, and they skipped right over a medical federal program. And what happens, as we've seen in the states, is once the states expand markets to adult use, the medical market really gets crushed. Patients don't have access to the medicines that they're used to and looking for. Manufacturers don't have, an incentive to make those types of products that patients have. So there's all this talk about how if it gets scheduled from 1 to 3, how it's going to impact medical programs. But again, I don't think it's going to, because it's really run by the states. They're going to be no more legal at 3 than they were at 1.
I'll add on to that notion, Carrie. On the industry side, if it's rescheduled, there's a tax benefit to companies. I'll be optimistic, or maybe we help put pressure on states to say, okay, great, licensed entity. Now that you have some extra funds, you're financially stable. Some companies aren't, so that'll just be a good benefit. Or you have a windfall. We want you to apply it this way regarding patients. I think on the other side, the research side, I'm very hopeful it changes the game in research. And for those who have been casually interested, pharmaceutical companies, those who want to do independent research, they'll be much freer to do that without Schedule 1 saying there's no medical benefit to this. So there may be a long-term effect. Carrie's talking about decades to approve drugs, but let's get started. Let's change it to Schedule III. Let's get more research going. Let's fund it and get the patient benefit long term.
And I will add, I think what will help is moving it from 1 to 3 just helps the whole mindset of kind of traditional medicine,
Right.
kind of looking at it that it's no longer in the same category as heroin. It's with codeine. So they're going, fingers crossed, going to be much more open to considering medical cannabis, much more open to looking at the research and educating. I mean, in my past life, I worked at the AMA, and I was very frustrated that organized medicine, I mean, like state medical associations and national medical specialties really do not want to engage at all with medical cannabis. And that was one of the reasons I was so happy to, had met Jordan and, started working with ACS, because it is one of the few not-for-profit organizations that is focused on medical cannabis. And so once that rescheduling happens, I do think that just the mindset and the destigmatization of it is going to improve, at least having those conversations with physicians.
And of course, all those institutions won't be saying no, like Mass General Brigham, because they won't be worried that they're going to get, all their funding removed. So I think it's a huge thing, even if it doesn't make any truly prescribable event happen immediately, right? So.
I love the way you phrased it earlier, Carrie, when you said, yeah, Schedule 1 or Schedule 3, it's still just as federally illegal. It doesn't really change. I like that. My next question is kind of a summary of questions that are all based on what are good job opportunities in this industry, whether it's for someone just starting out, someone who's trying to really find their career path, or even someone mentioned being, a little bit older, being 51 years old and feeling that age discrimination. What advice do you have? So just a general job help me advice out to the whole panel.
Well, I think we started with, there's a wide spectrum of job opportunities. I can tell you from my experience, as I said, I've been involved in a lot of different cannabis companies and as a consultant, your mainstream experience brought into the cannabis world is very welcome. There's always a need for higher level thinking, high level professionalism, finding a way to apply what you've learned in mainstream businesses to the cannabis industry in all the areas we talked about. So when you find an opportunity, don't be shy about, I haven't been in the cannabis industry. It's still a new industry, and it still lacks a lot of mainstream people going into it. So you have actually a leg up, because there are a lot of people at big companies or medium-sized companies who don't want to put that on their resume in their career that they work for a cannabis company. So we aren't yet drawing the best of the best. As a percentage, low. So I would encourage anyone who's got education and job experience to figure out how to apply that to cannabis.
And I also wouldn't overlook looking at your cannabis regulators. There's always jobs there. And someone with a background from University of Maryland's pharmacy school, I think that would be very attractive to some of these regulators. So, if you're not on LinkedIn, there are a ton of jobs that are always floating out there, looking for people that have some background, especially if you are able to read research and if we're comfortable with data. There's plenty of opportunity out there if you're looking not necessarily within the cannabis industry, but with a entity that's there to support them.
I would just add that every time I hire somebody, I always go looking for somebody who isn't in the cannabis industry. And that includes healthcare providers as well as staff. Because frankly, from my point of view, it's a lot easier for me to work with and teach people who don't come with a lot of sort of baggage of thinking things that aren't actually evidence-based. So it's been a real pleasure to work with my various staff people over the years to educate them about what the patients need or what we need to accomplish. And I've been very blessed with wonderful folks. So I guess my point is, if you're an outsider to this industry, that's an advantage, which is really what James was saying. And don't be afraid to kind of push that as part of your narrative.
You. This next question is specific to James. It says, what could or should cannabis companies be doing to assure they remain relevant through the coming corporate consolidation?
Well, this is a top of mind for a lot of operators. If you're an operator today, you don't want national legalization, you don't want interstate commerce, because that will lead to much more consolidation. If there were national legalization and interstate commerce, you could imagine a world where we have, like the alcohol business, big national brands and smaller market brands. So just like we have craft beer, we often talk about craft cannabis. So you can differentiate yourself with being the local guy, with how you cultivate and trying to tout your on-premise management versus, the multi-state operator. It's going to be hard, though. There's going to be a consolidation. I don't suspect national legalization is coming anytime soon. So the other issue is national brands do expand much easier in the manufactured products like edibles. We see in Massachusetts, where I am, edibles brands that are national dominate the market in Massachusetts. So it is natural, what happens in almost every industry. So if you're the local operator, you got to do the best you can to differentiate yourself.
Thank you. Let's see. I think we've touched on this a little bit, but and this is for the whole panel, what can non-doctors do to advance just the normalization of medical cannabis?
Come and work with us at ACS. I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself, but I mean, we're a volunteer organization. The idea that we want to push forward both education and regulation that supports patient care, it sounds like it's kind of up your alley. So please come and work with us, and let's advance that agenda.
I'll just add, generally, whatever your local market is, all the things we've talked about tonight, where you can advocate for education, where you can advocate for regulation change, where you can advocate for legal change, the politicians who need to change the laws. And the more we can look at what other states are doing well and say, why aren't we doing that in our state? Starts to make things maybe seem a little continuity amongst the states would be great.
That would be helpful. This is for Dr. Adam and Dr. Tishler, or Dr. Jordan. What are good examples of just patient experiences you've had that have made you either, very positive about cannabis medicine, or just a negative reaction that maybe a patient has had?
Is Adam still on the call?
Oh.
Okay.
No, I believe he signed off.
I see. Okay, good. I mean, in the sense that at least we know that he meant to, as opposed to disappeared. I've had a whole lot of ups and downs, cases or stories, and I've certainly taken care of a lot of people who benefited from cannabis medicine. My eldest patient, I think, was 104. And did very well until she passed away. And I've taken care of a lot of very sick patients, many of whom have had various types of cancer, who've gotten remarkable benefit from cannabis and for the usual wide range of things, including pain and anxiety and sleep and those sorts of things. So that's really been remarkably wonderful experience. And of course, one of the most heartbreaking part of being a doctor is that, you know, when patients come to you and they're sick, you have the opportunity to really intervene and help them. But in many cases, at least over some period of time, they go on to die anyhow. And I certainly feel each one of my patients passing rather acutely. And sort of to the second part of your question, I think it's because I feel so responsible and so feel acutely the pain and suffering that people endure, particularly when their cannabis care is either denied or complicated, that kind of leads me to be as passionate as I have been this evening about the ways in which the system doesn't work so well. And, you know, the idea that James put forward that we could move to something that was a prescription as a better communication tool to the dispensaries, and to educate our dispensary employee colleagues so that we have a more collegial and bi-directional relationship with them, all of which really serves to the benefit of the patients. And the things that bother me really are when the patient could, you know, get benefit from the treatment plan very quickly, but then, as I mentioned in an earlier comment, you know, they get to the dispensary and sort of things go sideways, and that delays the game for them in terms of benefit. It often costs them hundreds of dollars, or when they are doing well on so-and-so's edibles, and then they go in and there's no more so-and-so's edibles, and then they're casting about. And, you know, one thing we can say about pharmaceuticals is that they're generally, not always, as we've learned lately, but generally they're fairly available when you go to the store, and it just isn't that reliable or even that reliable at the dispensaries. So, you know, these are the stories that I experience through my patients that lead me to both be, you know, overjoyed at being able to be helpful and dismayed when things go sideways.
Understandably. Our next question is open to everyone, and this person is just looking for advice as far as being near a state or in a state where there isn't a medical program, how one of those gets started. What are your best advice for someone trying to get started and getting their state's medical program together?
I can start with that. So if, you know, there's 38 states that have medical programs. So if you're in the 12 that don't, go look and see what legislation is out there, because I guarantee you there is a bill out there, and there is a champion in the legislature that is trying to get a medical cannabis program established. So connect with them. Grab a meeting with them. I'm sure there is a local organization that is working on creating, you know, passing that legislation. So just simple things like that really can help you network and meet people that are also interested in working on that policy in your neighborhood. And I think that's just a great way to kind of get, you know, it helps you, you know, meet the players. It helps you, you know, get to know the legislator. And it also will, you know, hopefully get a bill passed. So I'd be happy, you know, connect with me offline, and I'd be happy to talk you through some very concrete steps that you can take.
Thank you so much. Just in the interest of time.
Also, as they're working on their state, don't discount your ability to reach out to experts like Carrie or James and myself through ACS. We'll come to your state or we'll testify online, but we can bring, you know, our experience and the science to help advocate. And so that's what we're here for. And if your state needs that kind of thing, if you can arrange it, we'd be there.
Great, thank you so much. So in the interest of time, we've got about 6 minutes left until it hits 8:30. If anyone on the panel has any last information they want to share, otherwise we can round it up for tonight.
I'll just say there's a lot of questions about job opportunities. Some of the mainstream platforms like Indeed and, you know, the other ones you mentioned, companies are posting jobs there all the time. And then there are specific staffing groups that have set themselves up to be cannabis specific. So if you're not aware of those, do some Google search and you'll find there are opportunities, actually plenty of them posted from agencies.
Well, thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. Really appreciate you joining us, and we hope to continue this relationship between ACS and MCST, and we hope to see you soon.